I'm talking with Charles Guerrier, who organises the Asia Beer Championship in Singapore, and we're going to talk about beer in Asia.
Nice to be with you, John. Ron, sorry.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Ron.
Um,
Good to be here, Ron.
so how did you get involved in the Asian beer scene?
I got to Asia in the mid-90s. I arrived in Hong Kong. I basically finished university, went backpacking around the world, and ended up in Hong Kong in the mid-90s in the F&B industry, and moved up to Singapore in '98 after the handover. Opened up my own bar after a few years, and we our second bar we opened up was a Belgian beer restaurant. And I went over to Belgium to start sourcing beers from Belgium and kind of find out more about what was going on over in Europe, and really kind of got into the beers then. And then a few years later, we opened up a Japanese craft beer bar because I'd started judging by that time and had met one of the owners of Hitachino Nest. Got very friendly, traveled to Japan a few times, and we decided that we'd bring in Hitachino and a few other Japanese craft beers as well. So that really got me going. That would have been about 2010, 2011. And that's when I really started kind of moving into more of the craft beer scene in Asia, with Japanese craft beers, because they were really the first movers in Asia with craft beer.
Okay, and how did that go? Did the Japanese beers go down well in Singapore?
Yeah, they did. They did. Hitachino does well. That's still selling in Singapore. I think Singapore had the advantage of being a developed market at the time. There were some craft beers coming in from America, so people were familiar with the idea of Japanese craft or of craft beer, and having a Japanese restaurant to go with it, it fitted the theme. Fitted. It's very much about the lifestyle, the Japanese theme, the food, the beer. Some of our early customers were Japanese restaurants, so that really helped to sow the seed of other Asian craft or of Asian craft beers really in Singapore. There were a few brew pubs at the time. There were brewing American and German style beers. So I think this helped to start develop the idea that Asia could produce craft beers as well, not just the commercial lagers that it's known for.
So was Singapore then the second place after Japan that it really started taking off?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you have different beers all over, particularly Southeast Asia. You have um, like Vietnam, for example. They have their beer hoi, which is very much a locally produced, kind of a very fast turnaround mass market lager. But it's very different to their Saigon beers or the Hanoi beer, which is pasteurized lagers. Yeah, they Vietnam has a history of unpasteurized beer in the market. But I think Singapore was really kind of probably the first market that took off outside Japan for craft beers. Well, Singapore and Hong Kong, they're developed economies. The consumer generally had more money to spend, so they could afford the more pricier beers.
And is there a big difference in price between craft beer and industrial beer?
Yeah, there is different markets. I think we're later on we're going to talk about kind of regulations and markets and taxation and things, but different markets. The what I would say you kind of see that the less developed markets, there's a much bigger difference between commercial and craft, whereas with the more developed markets such as Singapore, for example, Hong Kong, there's it's much closer. So Singapore craft beer would probably cost you 50 to 60% more than a commercial beer, the commercially produced lager. So Tiger is a local beer in Singapore, the local commercial beer. A locally produced craft, probably 60% more. Whereas you look at Vietnam, you're probably looking 200% more, 200 to 300% more for a craft beer than a local beer. Um, Thailand, probably similar, probably maybe 200% more. Than so double, more than double the price, almost triple the price of a commercially produced beer.
Okay. And so how's the scene changed in Singapore over the last 10 years?
Definitely more. craft breweries have come onto the scene. Um, 10, 12 years ago, we had some brew pubs, Brew Works, which was one of the first brew pubs in the region, actually. They're producing American craft beers in Singapore. So we had Brew Works, we had Paulana and Red Dot, which was a local brew pub. And what we've seen over the last 10 years is more production breweries coming in. You now have probably 10 or 12 production breweries in Singapore, all putting beers onto the market. So it's really the scene has started developing. These breweries are also producing beers which have more local varieties, have more local flavors in them as well. So it's not just the American or the European styles, but the styles are being adapted to suit local palates and local flavors as well.
So things are reasonably healthy then at the moment in Singapore.
Up and down. The breweries, yeah, the one of the problems Singapore is having at the moment is the dollar is very strong. So people who live in Singapore are earning in Singapore and then going overseas to spend their money overseas. So the F&B industry is in a bit of a flux at the moment. The F&B industry in general is having quite a tough time. The breweries are pretty much holding their own. Um, I think around the region you're seeing different things happening within the industry around the region. Some markets are struggling really hard, like South Korea, for example, is having a terrible time in the craft industry. Whereas, kind of post COVID, Vietnam had a bit of a surge, and then because of problems with the economy, it dropped down for a couple of years. But now we're seeing that bounce back again, and there's some very buoyant breweries in Vietnam now. Everyone's much happier with what's going on. And you're seeing that kind of across the region. Some economies are doing well, some not so. Some breweries are doing well, some not so well. So
Basically,
it,
it's
it's oh, sorry.
basically it's tied to how the economy's doing locally, then really.
Yeah, it does seem to. It does seem to be. The Thai economy, for example, is not doing as well as hoped. And it's kind of stagnating a bit in the industry. There's a lot more breweries coming onto the market, but I think they're all fighting for a similar size pie. So there's a little bit of tension in the market there. India, yeah, the economy is growing strongly. What, 6 to 8% per annum, and it's got one of the fastest growing beer industries in the region. So they're doing very well. China, the economy's slowing down a bit. Their industry it's kind of stagnated. It's doing well, but it's stagnated a bit. So yeah, where there's a surge in the economy, it definitely helps the craft industry in the region.
And so, does much craft beer get shipped around between the different countries in Asia, or is it mostly for the local market that's being brewed?
Not at the moment. I think so a lot of the breweries don't pasteurize their beer, so to ship around Asia with the heat, it's very difficult to move your beer from one country to another and still maintain the quality of product. So really, breweries are working much harder on their local market than they are looking for export at the moment. You are starting to see a few who are looking. So there are some Korean brewers who are doing a bit of export. Vietnam, Heart of Darkness in Vietnam, have been quite strong in their export for the last few years. They sell down into Thailand and into Singapore. But generally speaking, there's not a huge amount of movements around the region at the moment. So I think we'll see that over the next few years, but at the moment, there's not a lot.
So, which would you say have had the strongest craft scenes at the moment of countries in Asia?
Vietnam definitely. Vietnam's got a very strong beer drinking culture. Just across the nation, they've been drinking beer. I think the French brought the beer in 150 years ago or so, and it's very popular. Going out drinking after work is very popular and has been for a long, long time. They're very, very noisy drinkers, the Vietnamese. They like to make a lot of noise and have a lot of fun while they're drinking. So I think that's helped the craft industry develop in Vietnam. It's definitely stronger in the south, around Ho Chi Minh City. That's kind of where the center of the craft industry is in Vietnam. Um, so yeah, they're doing very well. India as well. India's again, they've got a strong beer drinking culture in India, so that's helped. And also with the new wealth that's coming into cities like Bengaluru and Mumbai as well, and Pune, they have very strong craft beer cultures, which are already there and developing as we speak.
And what are the challenges for the new craft brewers? I'm assuming it varies a lot depending on the country.
Yeah, every country is different. I mean, even if you take India, for example, every state is different in India. They have different regulations, they have different tax regulations. You know, just getting licensing for your brewery could take you, if your brewery is already set up and ready to go, it could still take you six months, a year to get your licenses for the brewery. So regulatory challenges are tough. Vietnam, you find quite a few of the breweries are actually owned by Singapore entities because it's easier to have a foreign run company in Singapore. If you want to reinvest more money into the company, it's easier to do it from outside of the country. If you want to sell shares in a company, you can do it from outside the country. It's easier. So regulatory challenges are tough. Thailand has a whole minefield of regulations that the brewers have to navigate. They, for example, the old regulations used to be you could only have a total of 5 horsepower of energy in your brewery.
Really?
So why how they came up with that, I have no idea. So it was very difficult for anybody to run a brewery on. They basically calculate all the power uses within your facility, and you can't have more than 5 horsepower. That's now been increased as 50 horsepower, so it's now starting to open up the industry, and more breweries are now starting to come in. And the Thais have been pushing for the last 3 or 4 years now for changes in the regulations, which they are finally seeing starting to come through. Packaging, for example, if you were not an industrial sized brewery, you weren't able to package your product for distribution. Just recently, within the last year, the Parliament has now changed packaging laws, or within the last 6 months, really, they've changed packaging laws to allow production breweries to package kegs. So you're now going to start being able to find draft beer around Thailand more easily because the regulation change. So, yeah, some countries are really difficult. Other countries, Singapore, very easy. Singapore, you apply for your license, you tick the right boxes, set up your brewery, all done. Yeah, you can set up a brewery very quickly in Singapore. So it's different all over the region.
And what are the biggest problems for new brewers trying to start up? Again, I assume it varies a lot by country.
Yeah, it does. Obviously, navigating the regulations is tough. Um, I think distribution as well, getting your distribution set up and running is quite tricky in some countries. What you find in the Philippines is breweries tend to stick with their own local area because it's difficult to move your beer around the islands, for example. It's very expensive to move your beer from Manila to Cebu. So most brewers will just keep their beer in Manila if they're producing in Manila, or if they're down in Cebu, they'll keep their beer down in Cebu. Um, so that's quite tough. I think what are problems breweries might face. Um, I mean, I think yeah, number one is the regulatory issues. I think a lot of countries are still struggling to kind of come to terms with this new small brewery. Um, the idea of having small breweries in the market where they've always just worked with the large conglomerates, the big breweries. It's very easy. You only have 2 or 3 big breweries per country. Regulations are set for those large breweries. So when you have a small producer, they need to start adapting the regulations and changing regulations.
Equipment, where do brewers get their equipment from?
A lot of it comes from China. The brew houses, tanks. A lot of the breweries will buy from China. India, a lot of them will be domestically produced in India because the tariffs on imported steel is quite high. So it makes it difficult to, just makes it uncompetitive to bring in breweries from elsewhere. Packaging tends to be. I'm probably gonna get in a lot of trouble for saying this. Packaging, the breweries that buy China-made packaging in the past have struggled with their canning machines, for example, their bottling machines. So a lot of the breweries have looked to Europe to buy their packaging equipment because the technology has been better. Now China's getting much better. The technology is getting much better. But a lot of the time you find with the breweries, particularly ones who are looking to export or to distribute further afield than their local market, they'll look towards European or American packaging technology.
And did they? Is there a lot of problem with oxidation in beer? Because that's something I noticed in, particularly in Brazil, that I think because of the climate, they have a lot of problems with oxidation.
Yeah, that there's oxidation's a problem, and also because many of the breweries, well, not many breweries, the beer is often not kept in optimal condition. So once the beer has left the brewery, once it goes to an outlet, a lot of outlets just don't know how to keep the beer, so they won't keep the beers in refrigerated condition. They'll keep them on the shelf. And if you're talking most of Southeast Asia, we're looking at 30 degrees in the shade every day. That's not good, a good environment to keep beer unrefrigerated. So that then it speeds up all of these processes. The oxidation process speeds up. If there are off flavors in there or contaminants in there, those flavors will accentuate much quicker than if they were kept refrigerated. So I think there is a problem, and also you know, breweries are going back to whether breweries are moving their beer around the region. I think these problems need to be tackled locally before breweries can then start looking overseas to start moving their beer overseas, even if they're looking to move it to other Asian countries.
Yeah. And taxation. Are there any countries where they have a lower rate of taxation for small producers?
Ron, you need to be an international tax lawyer to work out what on earth is going on in taxation in beer in Asia. I mean, anything you pick a number out the sky, and I think that's how taxation works in some places. Um, I mean, you've got all sorts. You've got some countries have flat taxation. Some countries have variable taxation. So, up until a few years ago, taxation in Korea was based on how much it cost you to produce your beer. So the cost of your brew house was put into the cost of the tax on the beer, what your staffing costs were. Thankfully they've changed their model now to a flat taxation rate. Um, there is a very different level of taxation across the region. China, I think, is one of the lowest. I mean, Hong Kong is the lowest. Hong Kong has zero taxation on beer,
Oh,
so
really?
there's no tax on
Hmm.
beer. Yeah, that's the place. That's the place to go and get some good price beer. They have no tax. I did for this interview. I did a quick um, exercise on with one of our AI friends to kind of work out which countries have the higher taxation per can of beer and which have the lowest taxation. And I think the tax runs from China is around 8 US cents per can of tax. If you're talking about a 330 ml can, 5%. Um, China comes in at about 8 cents a can. I think Thailand comes in about 20 cents a can. India, anything from 30 cents to about $1 a can, depending on which state you're looking at. Um, but I think the highest general one would be Singapore, which would be about 85 US cents a can. So it all across the board, it ranges from 8 cents to 80, 90 cents a can, depending on which market you're looking at.